myself really quick and welcome everyone. My name is Matt Carcieri. I have the honor of serving as the East Greenwich Yacht Club 68th Commodore, and we're about to start our season this weekend. We have our commissioning coming up. When Matt came to us, Matt's a member, he came to us and asked us if we would be interested in hosting this evening. The Board of Trustees jumped at the chance. This is an incredible opportunity for our club to give back to the community and have you down to our space. I said to Matt, I said, this is a fantastic turnout. Let's keep this going. So we're thrilled to partner with the Historic Preservation Society. Looking forward to hearing this lecture tonight. And Matt, thank you for coming down.
All right, everybody can hear me all right? Yeah. You okay? And I hope you can see in the back, but apologies, the screen's a little small, but it's going to be highly visual. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Matt Carcieri. I'm the historian for the East Greenwich Preservation Society, and we are delighted to have you. I'm also a member of the Yacht Club, so it feels good to be here for both those roles today. I do want to say a big thank you to Vin for arranging this. Vin did jump right on this. I was very grateful as soon as I reached out to him. He said, let's go, let's make this happen. So thank you, and thank you to Matt and crew for setting us up with a great setup here. So before we jump in, I want to always start with an advertisement for America's 250. Big year this year, and we've had a great series of programs. People have heard me say before, I really believe East Greenwich is Revolution Central in the state. That's because we had our first program. We talked about the very elite militia that formed here, the Kentish Guards, and we had a great program about that. Richard's here. Thank you very much, Richard, for that fantastic program. I mean, it's just crazy that we were the birthplace of a Continental Regiment, Army Regiment, the Black Regiment, a uniquely segregated regiment in the Continental Army, formed and trained and mustered right here in this town, another amazing part of our history. We also are the hometown, 0218 is the birthplace of George Washington's top lieutenant, General Nathaniel Greene, so another amazing piece of Revolutionary War history right here in town. And then as I talked last time, for anybody who came to my program, George Washington himself came into town on April 7th of 1776. So lots of amazing history here. So we've had great programs on those topics. Coming up, we've got a few more good ones. We have our next up is the Navy Day Picnic in the Park. So I encourage everybody to come to Academy Field. That is on June 6th, and it's a Saturday family day. Everybody takes over Academy Field, food trucks, all kinds of stuff. It's to celebrate the fact that the first American Navy was established in this town. Yes, more crazy history in this town. So we're celebrating that on June 6th. I think it's 11 o'clock or noon time will be publicized. We're going to have dignitaries kind of kick it all off. The Navy band's going to perform, so I encourage everybody to get out for the Navy Day Picnic in the Park. Then the Varnum House is hosting on June 21st the Lafayette Band. They're going to be performing a concert of patriotic music on the lawn of the Varnum House. Bring your lawn chair, come hang out. It's going to be a fantastic evening on June 21st. Then I'm back again on June 27th. I've organized a bus tour of about 24 historic sites in town that featured during the Revolutionary War. Again, there's lots of Revolutionary War history here. I don't think most people are aware. I invite you to come on board the bus and take a tour for about 45 minutes as we cruise around the downtown area, look at some of those sites. So that is a advanced ticket purchase event. So you do have to go online on eventbrite.com, and you have to search for Revolutionary East Greenwich, and you can pop in and buy a ticket. 25 bucks a ticket. I think it's about 25 tickets left. So buy now. Then coming up in August, very exciting. 2 days. For 2 days, the Varnum House is hosting a military encampment. So all kinds of militias, all the Revolutionary War groups are going to be coming and spending 2 days showing what life was like in a Revolutionary War camp. So that'll be really cool for 2 days in the Varnum House in August. And we're going to close with honoring our other Continental Army General, James Mitchell Varnum. So again, the state had 2 Continental Army generals, both from 0218. So we're going to end talking about General Varnum. A biographer, Bob Geek, has just written a new biography about him. He's going to present his book. So, yes.
Just wanted to mention, on June 16th, we're having Trudy Cox. We'll be addressing the Preservation Society and anyone who would like to join at the Kentish Guards Armory on Pierce Street.
Great, thank you, Mahoney.
You're welcome.
But this evening, I want to talk about another amazing part of our Revolutionary War history. I think it's amazing. I hope you do too by the end of this 40 minutes or so. I want to talk about the smugglers and privateers who sailed right out of here, right off these waters. I'll be talking about some of these docks right here in just a little bit. So to tell you about, though, that I need to start and talk about the beginning of our town's history and our maritime history in town. So you may not be aware, that's the act that had formed our town here in 1677. Incredible, 350 years old next year. But this town was designed to be an agrarian trading port, like Greenwich, England, hence the name, and other market towns in England and in New England. So this was intended to be a market trading town. That's how it was formed. So in the western part of town, for anybody who lives out there, we have someone here from Fry Farm, for example. There were 50 farms that were created, 50 farmsteads that were created in the western part of town. And their families produced exports like cedar and beef and cheese and vegetables. So that's what was going on in the western part of town. Meanwhile, here on the waterfront, the settlers set up a seaport. So this is actually the oldest surviving map of all the sections of our town. This is a map of the harbor district. You can probably maybe starting to recognize it. One very fascinating thing I love about these super old maps, this map is oriented east up. You know, all our maps today would look south to north, but this is east going west. That's because at the time, that's how the Brits saw this world. They just saw it as the coastline going west. So all maps are kind of oriented east up in this way. But you can make out Main Street right along here, Queen Street's going down, King Street's going down as it does today, Division Street right here. So the roads, of course, still hold from 1711. This design is held for 350 years. What I want to point out is we are seated right here in the right here in the 60s, 68, 69, in that area. Those lots are where the yacht club is now positioned. One interesting thing for yacht club members that are in the crowd, if you can make out that little square jut right there. I'm pretty convinced that square jut is the south parking lot where the launch runs. So unless somebody else knows about how that bulkhead came to be, I think that thing's been there for like 350 years. So pretty remarkable when you look at that map. Yeah, very distinguished. So anyway, that's our harbor district. So how this was created was this area where we are right now is where all the wharfs were. So just now, as the yachts are berthed right here, this is exactly where all the shipping wharves were located in this section of the waterfront. Where Queen Street is, where Finn's Harborside Restaurant is now, that was a shipbuilding area. So that was actually a shipbuilding port area. And then up around the area of Castle Street was called a rope walk. So that was a very long, narrow building where a spinner would walk backwards, miles and miles every day, weaving raw hemp fibers into rope. So he produced all the rope for the town's fleet back during the Revolutionary times. So this is how our port was set up at the time. But again, we're sitting right here exactly where the ships would have gone. So the other thing I want to show you then is the type of vessels that they sailed. So this is very typical of the kind of vessels at the time. This particular one sailed out of Salem, Massachusetts, but it's representative of the schooners of the time. The front mast was typically shorter. I don't know if any sailors know why, but they were always a shorter up in the front at the time. And they were all the sails were positioned parallel to the keel for greater speed. So that's how they were definitely schooners at the time. The go-to training destination at the time was the British West Indies. So as far as any of you think you're sailing right now, these guys would go out to the British West Indies for months and months at a time. The sugar plantations there needed food for their enslaved workers, and they needed lots of firewood for the boiling houses to produce sugar. In exchange, our mariners and other New England mariners, they returned home with sugar and molasses, which were the key ingredients for all-important thing, rum. So thank you to the hospitality people who made some rum cookies and rum cakes to get us in the spirit here, but we loved our rum, as all New Englanders did. And in fact, on this waterfront, we had multiple distilleries right along here. So one was located at the south end of the gravel lot, where people park to go buy rum at Blue right now. That's where one of the distilleries was. So we produced rum right here on the waterfront, and the demand for sugar and molasses was so great that, make sure it's working, that supply was actually constrained in the British West Indies. They just couldn't make enough sugar and molasses to supply all the New Englanders and their rum habit. So that led our town's mariners to voyage even further down to the Dutch colony of Suriname on the coast of South America. So these men were sailing all that distance, 2,500 miles, to get down to find their sugar and molasses. The problem with that was that Suriname was a forbidden zone for British colonists. That's because under the 17th century Navigation Acts, Mother England required her colonists to trade within the British Empire. You weren't allowed to trade outside the empire. So doing business in a Dutch territory constituted smuggling. So all of our mariners became smugglers. So they would travel 2,500 miles and they would drop anchor in the port city of Paramaribo. So I don't know if anyone's been in the rooms or been there, but Paramaribo is the key city that we would travel to. As a side note, I encourage you to kind of go on a little Easter egg hunt someday in our town hall. Our town hall, when it was originally built in 1804, was built as almost an homage to Suriname. So there's all kinds of architectural detailing. If you walk in the front door and look right inside, you'll see the molding looks like bamboo. And there's other codes like that if you look around. Unfortunately, a lot of it was taken away with the remodel in the 1900s, but there's still a little Easter egg. You can find little cues of Suriname in our town hall. So this is a painting from the 1750s. This is actually Rhode Island. This is the painter painted Rhode Island sea captains carousing in Paramaribo. So that's exactly the title of the painting. And obviously our mariners would have been part of this party. One of our smugglers was Captain Samuel Fry, who was the grandson of settler Thomas Fry Jr. You guys have heard me talk a lot about the Frys. And again, the Fry farm, the Fry farm that exists on Route 2, Samuel was the first settler's grandson. So his grandfather's farmstead was the one that still exists, still to this day, functioning as a farm on Route 2. Captain Fry is buried in the Quaker Cemetery on Cedar Avenue. His epitaph, if you can't read it, says, "In 1763, he was seized by a fever in Suriname, which terminated in a total loss of sight, which he bore with manly fortitude upwards of 27 years, often expressing, 'It is good for me that I am afflicted.'" So he was a good Quaker. The British authorities might have turned a blind eye to the illegal trading, all that smuggling going on, except that in the mid-1700s, Parliament faced a major cash crunch. The Royal Treasury had been drained by England's 7 Years' War with France, which was known in our continent as the French and Indian War. And so they were broke, and one way to raise cash was to regulate the economic activity of its colonies. And so in order to crack down on smuggling and get more of that revenue that they've been missing, Parliament adopted the Sugar Act in 1764. Well, all over America, colonists like those in Rhode Island were pretty outraged by that kind of enforcement. Since the birth of these colonies, we had not had any kind of oversight from the government from back in England, and it definitely put a pinch on their rum habit. I don't think it's too much of an extreme statement to say that the revolution might have started because of rum. So for the people of East Greenwich, when we saw one of the British patrol schooners out in the bay, there was a whole lot of bitterness in town. And famously, one was attacked and burned off of Gaspee Point in Warwick. In 1774, the imperial crackdown grew exponentially harsher here in town and around the state when a Royal Navy squadron arrived into Narragansett Bay. It was commanded by Captain James Wallace and crewed by 500 sailors. The flagship, HMS Rose, carried 24 cannons. And because the crew needed food, the British crews would go to the farms along the bay and raid the farms. So there's a lot of animosity toward Captain Wallace and his crew. And as the months went on, Captain Wallace got increasingly combative and brutal with the local colonists. At one point, you may know, he bombed Bristol. Another point, he and his crew torched Jamestown. But East Greenwich was spared. And that's largely because of the actions of the Kentish Guards, our local militia. They built a fort at the entrance to the cove. It was located, sorry, I'm going to get that right. They built a fort, and it was located, there it is, right off of Long Point. So if anyone knows Long Point, I know the boaters know, Long Point extends out from Garter Park. The boaters will recognize a green buoy that tells you you're at Long Point. And right across the way from Long Point, next time any of your boaters are motoring out, look for a brown house right above Greenwich Cove Marina. Sits up on a perch up there, and you'll see it has a flagpole and some rocks to mark the location of the fort. So the fort itself no longer exists. It at one time was earthworks with 9 cannons. It no longer exists, but the flagpole and the stones mark where it was located. So you can
It was Fort Daniel. It's right across from my house.
That's exactly it.
In my front yard.
That's in your front yard. Okay, here we go. We got the resident. Yes, that's what street is that?
Blackmore.
Blackmore
Corner
Street.
of Blackmore and Williams.
That's it. That's Fort Daniel. So that's what we're talking about right now, Fort Daniel. So it was a large earthworks. We know it's probably 150 yards long. Had 9 cannons, as I say. As you know, it no longer exists because it was an earthworks and has been taken away because of the train tracks and everything else. But I made a really, for me, because of the stuff I'm into and the stuff I do, really exciting discovery a couple weeks ago that one of the cannons from the fort still exists. So you can go over to the Theodore Green Homestead in Coventry, and it's on display right in front of.
Is that the one they took from Frank Eckloff?
That's exactly the one.
Okay.
There you go.
I was there.
It still survives, so you can go visit it over Coventry. Yes, so that's that. So yes, apparently it worked because we were never attacked in East Greenwich. So thank you to the Kentish Guards for this fine fort. And if you ever have the chance to go out on William Street and look at that positioning, we'll look at that on the bus tour. It's kind of amazing how strategic it was in terms of that location in keeping British ships from approaching the town.
Oh boy, it's right across.
So I got to say that Captain Wallace did us another favor. He, for this town anyway, he triggered another big action here in town, and that is the establishment of the first American Navy. So that event happened because at the time our town hall was one of 5 county courthouses, and there was no state house at that time. And so the Rhode Island General Assembly would rotate its meetings between county courthouses. And so there was a particular meeting in early 1775 when they were meeting here in East Greenwich. And they couldn't use the courthouse in Newport because the British had occupied Newport. So we got a lot of action here at our town hall, what's now our town hall. And in early 1775, the Assembly discussed a proposition advanced by John Brown, who you may know of. He was a very wealthy Providence trade merchant. And he was furious at Captain Wallace because Captain Wallace had seized 2 of his private vessels. And he really wanted to get back at Captain Wallace. So in the hope of reclaiming his vessels, he offered the colonial government another of his vessels, a vessel called the Katy, to fight back against Captain Wallace and try and recapture his vessels. So the General Assembly, while seated up on Main Street, debated that offer, and they passed a resolution to purchase the Katy, along with another vessel named the Washington, and then put them under a command of a single officer, a guy named Abraham Whipple, and he ordered that both the ships be fit out for military service. So that is how the first American Navy was born, right here in East Greenwich. Yeah, we got it happening here. So a few months later, the Continental Congress established a full Continental Navy at the urging of Rhode Island in their General Assembly. It purchased the Katy from Rhode Island, and it rechristened her as the Providence. So she was from then on known as the Providence. Her first commander was the famous John Paul Jones. Under his command, the Katy, now the Providence, captured 40 enemy vessels, which was higher than any number of vessels captured by anybody else in the American fleet. So our little Katy and the Navy born right here did good things. As we all know, a full war broke out when the shots were fired at Lexington and Concord. And a number of our men joined the Continental Army. We actually had over couple dozen men join the Continental Army immediately. There were a number of ways to serve. That's one of them. Many others celebrated in a way that's not really ever talked about, but they served by privateering. So that's the next topic I want to talk about. So privateering was an arrangement sanctioned by the Continental Congress that encouraged private ship owners to turn their vessels into bounty hunters. They would arm themselves for action, and then the crews would go out and attack the British merchant fleet and rob the ships of their cargoes. Basically, they were licensed pirates. The incentive for the ship owners was that they were allowed to keep the bounty. So in essence, it was a kind of a get-rich-quick proposition, but it had a patriotic purpose. The privateers helped the war effort by disrupting the British economy, and they very much frustrated the Royal Navy in the process. One of the privateering vessels that sailed from EG was named for the town. This record, you can't read it back there, but it shows that in 1776, the Rhode Island Secretary of State registered an 80-ton sloop called the Greenwich. She carried 24 guns, both cannons and swivel guns, and was captained by EG resident Joe Pierce, as in like the Pierce family on Pierce Street. The vessel had a crew of 80, and the venture had 7 investors. That's listed here. These are the investors in the Greenwich. And at the top of the list, you'll see Jacob Green. He was General Nathaniel Green's brother. So he was the chief investor of the Greenwich privateering vessel. Just a quick slide on kind of the stuff they did. So in October 76, the Greenwich went out and it captured first, all in 1 month, it captured first the 100-ton brig Paisley, a British brig carrying sugar, rum, and cotton. It then went out and captured the 150-ton brig Phoenix, which was carrying fish and empty casks. And then went out and caught the 370-ton Belle, carrying fish and lumber. So just an example of the kind of things that our privateers would be able to get done in a pretty short amount of time. Unfortunately, our namesake vessel met an ironic demise. During an excursion the next year, she was captured by the British east of Nantucket, and the Royal Navy then took her into its fleet and rechristened her as HMS Greenwich. So she became an enemy ship. The enemy stationed her in Savannah, where she joined HMS Rose, as in evil Captain Wallace. So she then served alongside HMS Rose in defending Savannah against which the British had occupied. During a side mission to South Carolina, the Greenwich became grounded in a shallow inlet, and rather than risk recapture, the British set her on fire. So that was the end of the Greenwich. In East Greenwich, the big player in privateering was Silas Casey. He was a prominent trade merchant who lived up on the corner of Main and Division Streets. His firm had a wharf, and his wharf was located right here where Dock B is. So there it is, Dock B. So right there is exactly where Silas Casey had his firm's wharf with his ships. You will know Silas Casey because many of you probably know Casey Farm, which he later owned and operated, and that's still preserved in Saunderstown. So his farm still exists, even though his house in East Greenwich no longer does. During the course of the war, Silas invested in 5 different privateering vessels. One was called the General Green. She was a 30-ton sloop that carried 4 cannons and 12 swivel guns. She was captained by EG resident John Garcia and had a crew of 30. In the summer of 1776, the General Green happened upon the 310-ton St. James, which was a British merchant ship that had been crippled by a storm off Cape Hatteras. Although the St. James was 10 times bigger than the General Green, Captain Garcia was able to seize her. According to tradition, the British captain wept because he was so humiliated that he'd been captured by what he called a hog trough. Captain Garcia escorted the St. James right back here to the cove and unloaded some very valuable loot. It was the cargo was sugar, copper, and rum. So certainly Silas Casey and crew made a lot of money that day. So as that illustrates, privateering could be very lucrative. It could be very profitable for these men. But it also involved a lot of peril. The combat at sea was vicious, and many privateers were outgunned. Those who weren't killed were imprisoned in horrific conditions. Many were placed on cramped prison ships where diseases were rampant. Others were sent to England to rot inside jails. One infamous institution was Fortin Prison in Portsmouth on England's south coast. During the war, it held about 3,000 American sailors. One of those sailors was an East Greenwich man named Jeremiah Pierce, Job's brother, also related to the family on Pierce Street. And his story that I'm about to tell you is like out of a movie. I don't know if there's any Verdi's here, but I want the movie rights because it's out of a movie. I happened to stumble upon this. I was like, why do we not know about this stuff? It's an incredible story. So Jeremiah's privateering brig was captured in 1778. And he and his fellow crew members were then transported to England, and he was one of the guys who was jailed in that notorious Fortin prison. 2 months later, he and 5 other prisoners escaped by digging a hole under the floor. And for 12 days, they sneaked across the English countryside to Dover. There, they stole a small rowboat and set out for France. 44 hours later, they arrived. Unfortunately for Jeremiah, things did not work out the way he expected. Because he was shoeless and penniless, and he spoke English, the French authorities viewed him very suspiciously, and they imprisoned him again. So in desperation, he sent an appeal to none other than Benjamin Franklin, who was serving as a diplomat in France. He wrote, "I have a wife in East Greenwich, and I have been a long time from home, and as I have no friend in France, I humbly beg the favor of your honor to get my exchange." And Benjamin Franklin acted on the appeal, and he secured his release. He gave Jeremiah 4 gold coins, which he used to get back to his wife here in East Greenwich. So, pretty cool story that, I think the British could do something with it. So as that story illustrates, privateering was a very risky business. In total, 12,000 seamen here in America died in the prisons and on the enemy ships. But their sacrifice was definitely our nation's gain. While the Continental Navy captured about 200 enemy vessels, privateers captured over 2,000. And their piracy played a pivotal role in weakening the British economy. They did over $300 million of damage to the economy of Britain in today's dollars. And all that prize value came back to the colonies, helping us with our war effort. And in all of it, Rhode Island was an outsized player. The state contributed about 150 privateering vessels in total to the nation's fleet. And our local privateers here in East Greenwich helped the American cause another way too. As you know, the British occupied Newport for 3 years during the war. One of the reasons the British went and occupied Newport was because they were trying to halt some of the privateering that was going on, because it was causing such havoc for them. So they came and they occupied Newport to shut off our bay. And as a result, that was about 7,000 troops who were there in Newport. Those were 7,000 troops that could have been deployed on the battlefields in the Mid-Atlantic, in New York and elsewhere. So truly it's not too much of a stretch to say, without the work of the privateers that we never talk about or think about, we might not be a nation today. So pretty outstanding contribution of those men. As a postscript to the whole story, I want to say that after the war, this whole waterfront had its heyday. So the whole port really thrived at that time after the Revolution. In 1790, probably because the government loved what our mariners had done here, the U.S. government designated East Greenwich as one of what they called a port of delivery. That's where imports could come into. There was only 7 locations in Rhode Island where imports could be delivered. East Greenwich was made one of those ports of delivery by the new U.S. government. And with that, we got our first federal building, which was a U.S. Customs house that stood right behind me in the parking lot right here. In the 1800s, it was moved to the corner of Division and Duke Streets, and you can still go see it. It still survives over there on the corner of Division and Duke Street. So, but pretty outstanding. This is our first federal building. It was part of the Treasury Department that was instituted right away, and its function was to license vessels and to collect tariffs on imported goods. The problem, it says in some of the histories, is that our mariners weren't so good about paying taxes. So although we had a customs house right here, apparently all the vessels would come in and out in the middle of the night to try and avoid the tax collector. For the local mariners, the port of Paramaribo in Suriname continued to be the go-to destination. We still wanted our sugar and molasses to make our rum. That was still the object. And there's a great letter I want to close with that kind of brings it all to life in terms of what we were doing, what risks we were putting out there, what our young men were doing to get the sugar and molasses to make sure we could all be drinking rum back here in East Greenwich. So this is a letter I want to close with to kind of represent kind of the harrowing life of our local mariners. The author of this letter was a 25-year-old sea captain, 25 years old. So keep in mind, he's going 2,500 miles to Paramaribo, captaining a ship at age 25. He and his parents lived up on Main Street. You can't read this, but I can. He wrote, "Dear parents, I have but just time to inform you of my distress. I was 7 days at sea all alone. I got all masts beat out. I had very severe weather indeed. But I have got into Charleston with my vessel and cargo, which consists of the very best of molasses and sugar. My mate is dead, and all the rest very sick. But don't you be scared about me, for I am as hard to die as an old loon. I remain your loving son, Perry G. Arnold." So there you have it, a few of the stories of the harrowing, the mariners and some of the harrowing life they lived to both bring liberty to this country and make sure we were drinking our rum. So that's what I want to share tonight. So thank you very much. And I'm happy to try and answer questions, but I don't know if this is, there's many topics in this about related to history in this town. This is one of them I've kind of tried to figure out a little bit, but I don't know a ton more. But I'll try to answer any questions. If not, I know there's some other experts in the room. Anything anybody's curious about?
Where's the Quaker Cemetery on Cedar?
The Quaker Cemetery is where you can go find Samuel Fry. If you are going, if you're on Kenyon Avenue, turning it into Middle Road, so you're crossing over, you're going to cross, and you're going to hit the intersection with Cedar, Kenyon hitting Cedar. Take a right, and there's a cemetery. It's actually a walled cemetery right there, just about a couple hundred feet up on Cedar Ave, up the middle. Yeah, it's cool. It's a cool place. There used to be a Quaker meeting house there on that location. Yeah.
I want to say thank you for helping bringing our history alive.
Oh, you were very welcome. Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
Were any of these privateers involved in the slave trade?
Were any of the privateers involved in the slave trade? I will give another talk someday on slave trading. There was a tremendous amount of slave trading that happened in this town. It was mostly before the Revolution. So about the time of the Revolution, most residents in town, as Samuel Fry and the Quaker Meeting House illustrates, most of the residents here were Quakers. We were a very big Quaker town. And about the time of the Revolution, the Quakers kind of got around to their abolitionist position and said it is immoral to own slaves. So it's about that time that slavery and slave trading ended here in this town. So someday I'll give a talk pre-Revolution, where certainly there was a lot of slave trading happening here in town. But by the time of the Revolution, it had ended. It mostly ended. Yeah.
You mentioned Silas Casey his house was on Main Street.
Yeah.
There's a house on Love Lane that I think was moved from Main Street.
Yeah, you know it.
Is that his house?
No.
Okay.
The Casey family again. They were one of the two. The Arnold family was the wealthiest kind of maritime trading family in town. I'll talk about them someday. The Caseys were also very big and wealthy. Silas Casey, so where the old post office is, if anybody knows where that sits, on the corner of Main and Division Street, that's where Silas's son Wanton lived. So he built a beautiful house on the corner where the old post office was. That is the house that now lives on Love Lane. So it's Silas's son Wanton's house.
Got it.
It's a spectacular house. You can't miss it. If you're going down Love Lane, you'll see, that house doesn't belong here. It's from another era, and it's a spectacular home. It's been really well maintained.
Mm-hmm.
So that was Silas's son, who was also in business with him. Anything else? So we're going to call it a night? Oh, one more.
I'm just curious, I know sometimes privateers will slide into actual piracy once their use is over, and I'm wondering if there's any incidents of that, where they all became legitimate, and I'm using air quotes.
Yeah, I don't know. Unfortunately, this whole world is funny. For me to create a presentation for you guys tonight was a lot of work, only because there's not a lot of records. You can imagine, smuggling, you're not writing that down. Piracy, you're not writing that down. So it was very difficult to kind of piece together even some of these stories. So unfortunately, I can't give you a good answer on that one. Yes, one more.
Yeah, that last letter you read. Where do you find that? That's amazing.
That was a blast for me as a kind of local historian. The Rhode Island Historical Society is an incredible asset to the state. So they have it's really cool for anyone who's ever not been part of it. You kind of go. There's an online database, and I happened to search, kind of was searching stuff. I was like, oh wow, there's a bunch of papers related to this captain, Perry Arnold. Perry Arnold's papers still exist. So you go and you knock on the door and you ask for it, and they hand you this big box, and it's crazy. They hand you, like, I can look at this, like, you know, it's a box. And so I just started thumbing through. There's this. He's got some of his letters. Someday maybe I'll just publish a book of Perry Arnold's letters, because he's got another one where he was sailing. He had just left the bay, and he was loaded up with horses. So another interesting part of our state history you may know is that we raised a breed of horse called the Narragansett Pacer that was very, very popular breed. We were kind of like Kentucky, and you know, Kentucky before Kentucky. And so we used to ship horses from here. So they would bring down the herds down King Street, and they'd load on the vessels. Perry Arnold was one of the guys who would take the horses out on his vessel. Well, anyway, he just barely left the bay, and lightning struck. And he writes about how lightning struck, took out his mast, and 12 horses immediately fell over dead. So he's got some good letters. I'll publish them. One more on the way back.
If there was a thriving slave trade pre-Revolutionary War, how connect the Barnums and their military outfit with the Barnum Army and such? It doesn't make sense. If you're selling black people, then black people take up arms and save your ass. So leave that story.
How do we end up kind of mustering a regiment of black men and women?
Yes.
Yes, I see what you're saying. Yeah, well, honestly, Varnum, you know, one of the amazing things about, we're going to have a talk about him, so I don't want to steal the thunder, but Varnum was an amazingly progressive man. He was a truly brilliant mind, big open-minded guy, and it was really his initiative. He was in Valley Forge and like, we don't have enough men to fight in the war. He said, you know, I believe we should be offering, he viewed it as an opportunity to because the program, it offered men their freedom. They would be free after service in the war. So there was some magnanimous intent, not fully, because they had to be bought. The General Assembly had to pay the slave owner for that man, so they were purchased still. And of course, they had to then go through incredible hardship and in the line of hard duty to get to that freedom. But many men did. I'll talk about that on the bus tour. We'll go past one of the homes where one of the men lived, but because it's a fairly remarkable thing still to think about the fact that so many men earned their freedom through that process. But Varnum was a very enlightened guy, is my point on that. And so it was his idea. And so he was not part of any of these slave trade activity.
Sure.
One more. Yeah.
Kind of along the lines of black soldiers. Some of them did not, did not get to have their happy ending.
Correct.
That they were resold, or however you want to say it,
Went
back to their.
Went back to enslavement.
Yeah.
Yeah, someone did. So it's really dumb. So the point up here is that even some of those men ended up, they did not make it to that kind of place of freedom, but some of them ended kind of being enslaved again. Those stories are kind of fuzzy to me. There's a letter up here in the Varnum Armory from one of those men who I think, you can only imagine what those men must have gone through. And because he actually was kind of asking the family that he'd come from if he could go back there again. And you can imagine after the horrors of war and everything you've been through trying to figure out how to start your own life, it must have just been so overwhelming that he was actually asked to be enslaved almost. Kind of like I want to come back. So there are that's one incident I know. I don't know many others. I'm not an expert in this field. All right, I think I'm going to call it there. But thank you guys very much for coming out.